Hello and welcome back to Totally Abstracted. This week I want to talk about something that's been changing for me in the studio recently. The idea of when a painting is actually finished. Or maybe more accurately, when we decide it's finished. Over the last week or so, I've been moving away from the faces I've been exploring. I found myself back in the more abstract, expressionist landscape space. It feels looser, more physical, more intuitive again. There's a lot of movement, a lot of paint being pushed around and scraped back and rebuilt. And I've really enjoyed that return to something a bit more expansive. But working this way with acrylics brings its own frustrations. Acrylics dry quickly, which is helpful, but not always quickly enough for the way my brain works. I'll want to move into the next layer or adjust something straight away. And the paint just needs a bit more time before it's ready. So there's this constant rhythm in the studio of making a move, waiting, looking again, making another move. And sometimes I just don't want to wait. And in that rhythm though, another question has started to creep in. Is this painting finished? Or is it just paused? And at the same time as all this, I've been photographing some of these pieces and sharing them online, on Instagram or recently as a video. And that introduces another layer to the process, because the moment something is shared publicly, it can start to feel like it has to be complete. Like the act of showing it somehow turns it into a finished piece. But I'm starting to realise those two things don't have to be the same. Sharing a piece of work doesn't mean it's reached the end. It might just mean this is where the painting is today. I think a lot of us feel an invisible pressure when we post our work. Once it's out there, we feel like we've declared it finished. And if we go back to it later, add something, change something, disrupt something, it can feel almost like we're undoing something we've already presented to the world. But the thing is, paintings don't actually care whether they've been on Instagram. They need the time they need. And I've been noticing in myself that sometimes when I record or share something, there's a temptation to push it to a conclusion a little too quickly. To resolve it, to tidy it up, to land the ending. Partly because it feels satisfying to present something complete. But that's not always what the painting needs. Sometimes the best thing you can do is stop at a resting point and say, this is what it is for now. Not forever, just for now. I think underlying all this is that tension between the rhythm of content and the rhythm of painting. Social media content has a pace. It moves fast. There's always the next post to do, or the next video if you've got a YouTube channel, or the next week to be doing something and sharing something. That pace can feel productive. It feels like momentum. But painting doesn't always move at that pace. Painting is slow in a way that content culture often isn't. And I think what happens for a lot of artists sharing on social media is that over time, without even noticing, they start making work that fits the rhythm of sharing rather than the rhythm of making. I've definitely done this. And then the paintings get resolved a little quicker, maybe too quick. So part of what I'm paying attention to now in my practice is, am I making decisions for the painting or am I making decisions for posting? These are very different decisions. I've talked before about returning to older work, pulling paintings back out months later and seeing them differently. That's still something I value deeply. Distance changes the way you see a painting. Your eye becomes clearer. But I'm also realising that even with brand new work, the same principle applies. A painting might look resolved enough to share today. It might even feel satisfying in the moment. But that doesn't mean the conversation with it is over. Time is part of the process. Acrylic paint might dry in minutes or hours, but sometimes the painting itself needs weeks or months before you really understand what it wants to become. And sharing the work along the way doesn't have to interrupt that. It only becomes a problem if we start rushing the work for the sake of the content. If the need to show something begins to override the slower, quieter rhythm of letting a piece develop. That's something I'm becoming more aware of in my own practice. I've also been thinking about what we actually mean by finished, because when I push myself on it, I'm not sure I can define it easily. Is a painting finished when you can't imagine adding anything else, when nothing is asking for more attention? Maybe it's finished when it holds your eye without restlessness, when you look at it and feel something settle. Or is it finished when you simply stop? When you put the brush down and walk away and life carries on and you never quite get back to it. I've got a lot of paintings like that. So I suspect for many, it's closer to that last one more often than we like to admit. There are paintings I thought were finished that I now look at and can see exactly what they need. And there are paintings I kept working on past the point where they needed anything because I couldn't quite trust it was done. And I see that when I watch a lot of my YouTube videos back. Learning to tell the difference does take time. It takes practice. And it takes a willingness to be wrong sometimes, to overwork something and have to live with that, or to leave something too soon and then circle back, sometimes months later. There's no easy formula, but I do think the more time you spend with your work, the more your instincts sharpen. There's nothing wrong with sharing works in progress. In fact, I think it can be really valuable. It lets people see the process, the uncertainty, the stages that usually stay hidden in the studio. It reminds everyone that paintings don't appear fully formed. But sharing shouldn't take away the painting's right to keep evolving. It's okay to show something and still come back to it later. It's okay if a piece you posted last week isn't actually finished yet. It's okay if the version people saw online turns out to be just one stage in a much longer conversation. And honestly, I think people respond to that. When you show a painting and then come back a month later and say, I went back in, I changed this, it became different. That's not embarrassing. That's actually one of the most interesting things you can share. It shows that your relationship with the work is ongoing, that you're not just producing, you're genuinely in dialogue with what you make. And that's a very different energy from the artist who posts a finished piece with a neat caption and closes the door. Both are valid, but one of them lets people into the real texture of a creative life. So maybe finished is just the moment we pause long enough to say, this is done for now. Not final, not sealed, just resting. Because the artist you are in 6 months might see something different. The painting might ask for one more mark, one more shift, one more disruption. And that's not a failure of the earlier version. It's simply the work continuing to live. So if you're sharing your work online while it's still evolving, maybe the most important thing is this. Don't let the act of sharing rush the act of making. Let the painting keep its own pace and let time remain part of the process. And allow yourself the freedom to return, revise and continue the conversation if the work calls you back. And one last thought before I go. We talk a lot about creative confidence, about backing yourself, trusting your instincts, owning your voice. And those things matter enormously. But I think real creative confidence includes something that doesn't get talked about as much. The confidence to leave something unresolved, to say, I don't know yet what this painting is. To share it anyway, not because you've declared it finished, but because this moment of not knowing is also worth sharing. That's a different kind of courage, and I think it's one of the most honest things we can offer the people following our work. A genuine glimpse into the uncertainty that sits at the heart of making something. Because the truth is, none of us always know when a painting is finished. We just keep looking, we keep listening, and we show up again the next day and let the conversation continue if that's what's needed. As always, thank you for listening. Keep exploring, keep experimenting, and keep things totally abstracted.